Welcome to the Smithsonian Institution's Here to Career webinar. Today we're happy to be joined by a whole bunch of really, really wild and crazy veterinarians that are used to dealing with wildlife. If you've joined us here on the webinar today, we're so glad you have. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, we're so glad you did. We're just coming together now. And as you know, sort of in this age of COVID, I was just joking with Mac. He and I, and I'm not sure if Neil and Veronica are in the same, but we have small mammals in our house in the form of small children. So if you hear barking dogs, if you hear small children during this webinar, that's just a sign that this is the real deal, man. This is legit. No polished, over-polished stuff here. You're talking to the real people. So folks, the way this will work is we'll let our distinguished panelists introduce themselves and offer a little bit about their careers, after which we'll take questions from you. And if you've got a microphone, make sure you plug it in, and we'll make you live on the air and you can ask your question. Again, I want to honor everybody who's chosen to join us here today. For doing so, I wish I had my act together as much as you did when I was your age. Again, my name is Eric Woodard, Director of Fellowships and Internships at the Smithsonian. So glad you've joined us today. And without any further ado, we'll turn it over to Dr. Mac. Mac, what's your story? Tell us your deal, if you would, please.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Eric, and thanks everybody for tuning in today. My name is Mac. I'm the Director of Training for the Global Health Program at the Smithsonian's Conservation Biology Institute. And I do have one of these really cool jobs where I get to work at a zoo and with colleagues and counterparts from around the world that are really dedicated to wildlife and environmental conservation and healthy populations of humans and animals. And from all of us, we really hope you get the chance to visit very soon. We're located at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., so come visit as we get through this COVID thing. I'll leave it at that for now, but I'll tell you a bit more about my long and illustrious career path. But I'll hand it over, I think, to Veronica next.
Hi, I'm Veronica Galicia. I am a veterinary technician by trade, and I work for the Global Health Department at the zoo with Mac. And I just started with the department in July, but I was a veterinary technician at the vet hospital at the zoo for 11 years. And then I recently switched over to the Global Health Department. So it's nice to be still part of the zoo, but in a different aspect of it. And I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Veronica. Neil, so glad to see you, man. You're doing a great job. Take it away. What's your story?
Good afternoon, Eric. Good to see you. My name is Neil Aziz. I work in the Department of Wildlife Health Sciences at the National Zoological Park, specifically in the Department of Pathology. So we're responsible for running all the laboratory work to figure out why all of our animals may be sick, or just doing routine health screening, laboratory tests on our animals. And also, when it's time for our animals to leave us and die, we are the ones who try to evaluate all of the bodily tissue to figure out why they died.
Right. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We're so lucky to have you, especially, I know you guys are all doing stuff related to global health, which, there's probably nothing more timely right now than that. But Mac, if you would, tell us a little bit about your career path. How did you get into this stuff? And I might have you all do another quick round. What's your career story, if you would?
Yeah, delighted to. So my career path started just where a lot of you are. I started off as a kiddo, and even before high school, with an interest and passion for animals and the environment. I translated that interest into a long stint as a professional student. I spent a long time in school, 4 years in undergrad, studying biology and environmental studies, 2 years as a master's student studying veterinary virology, and then 4 years in veterinary school, and then finally 2 years as a postdoc resident in veterinary public health. And I kind of lose count, but depending on how you count, I'm really on my sixth or seventh career. Over my career path, I've worked as an animal care technician in research laboratories and at zoos. I've worked as a laboratory researcher, a wildlife control officer, an epidemiologist. I've been a university professor, a disease outbreak and investigator, and my most recent thing, just before I came to the Smithsonian about a year ago, I was serving as agricultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, Japan. I worked in food safety for the New Zealand government for a couple years. And I've really been fortunate to have had some great opportunities to live and work overseas. I did a stint in the Peace Corps after I did my undergrad in Cameroon and in West Africa. Like I said, I worked in New Zealand for a couple of years. I spent about four and a half years working in Kampala in Uganda and around East Africa, and most recently Japan. And, you know, connecting another of my passions is just really to learn from and work with people in many different cultures and backgrounds than my own. So that's something that really keeps me energized about my career.
Well, wait a second, man. I think you and I are about the same age. How is it possible that you did all that? Did you use your biology to clone yourself? I mean, that's a lot of stuff.
No, it's Eric. It's really just a fancy, long way of saying I still really don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Right now, it's keeping me pretty happy and interested. But yeah, you can get with some base interest in animals or the environment, you can get a long way and do a lot of cool stuff.
That's awesome, awesome. Well, Veronica, if you would, tell us your story, please.
My path is a little bit shorter than Mac's.
Well, whose is it? I mean, let's be honest, right?
I pretty much knew I wanted to be a veterinary technician from high school. Well, growing up, I wanted to be a veterinarian because I didn't know that there was any other option to work with the animals other than being a veterinarian. And in high school, I took an animal science class, and the teacher said, well, what about being a veterinary technician? And I was like, what is that? And like, well, it's a nurse for animals. So I was like, oh, that even exists. So I started looking into the profession. And, you know, I like school, but not that much. So it intrigued me, and it was more of the hands-on that I wanted to do. As a veterinary technician, we are the radiologist, the phlebotomist, the surgical assistants, the pharmacists, the veterinarian's right-hand man, all in one. And that's pretty much what I wanted to do. And so I went to Northern Virginia Community College. It's here in Virginia, and it's a 2-year program, which is basically just to get your associates and then your vet tech license. There are other programs that are 4 years that you can get your bachelor's, but I just wanted to be a veterinary technician, and that was it. So I knew I wanted to be a veterinary technician, and I knew I wanted to work at a zoo, specifically the National Zoo. That was always my dream. I grew up in Washington, D.C., right down the street from the zoo. I started volunteering at the zoo right out of high school, basically, at the small mammal house, and then kind of weaseled my way in volunteering at the vet hospital there as well. And I got pretty lucky that when I graduated vet tech school, because I was a volunteer, they knew who I was, and I got offered a full-time position at the vet hospital at the zoo when I graduated vet tech school. And so that's when I started my career in vet tech medicine and in zoo medicine. So it was a rough ride in the beginning because I started my career at both things at once, but it was definitely a lot of fun. And on the side, I still did small animal emergency as well to kind of make sure that I understood both sides of it at the same time. And then, like I said, I worked 4 years during that time at SCBI in Front Royal, and then in DC as well. And I left the zoo for 3 years, and then I came back now with an opportunity in the global health department. It's a different position, more of an administrative position, but there are possibilities and opportunities to travel. I will say that when I worked at the vet hospital, I got to go to China to release Pewaski's horses that we were radio collaring. I got to go to the Asiatic black bear sanctuary in southern China. So I got to do a lot of traveling with the zoo, and it was a fantastic experience. So very rewarding.
Veronica, I love your story. I love it. That's awesome. I love how you're doing applied stuff, and whether you know it or not, the story you give like hits so many points of advice. I'm always giving early professionals. So good work, good work. So guys, the questions are already rolling in. So make sure if you've got a question, don't be shy. Go ahead and put it forward. Neil, if you could, what was your path?
I don't know. My path is a little bit all over the place. I grew up in a small town called the Bronx, New York, in a very, very old time when New York City wasn't as luxurious looking as it is now. And I used to find my home would be at the Bronx Zoo. And then also, I would always find peace watching wildlife documentaries on public broadcasting TV. So at that time, I really was in love with animals, but the computer age was going on. So I went to undergrad. I majored in computer science and biology. But I still knew that I wanted to be a veterinarian. And I was very good with the technical and computer programming aspect of it. But I didn't feel like I was in touch with life if I was just, going to be a computer tech guy. So after undergrad, I went over to veterinary school. I went to Tuskegee University. And that's the first time that I found out that you could actually specialize as a veterinarian. Just like human physicians can specialize, veterinarians can specialize. So for me, I'm a veterinary anatomic pathologist, which basically is, if you think about it, is the animal's coroner or the animal's pathologist. So we read the biopsies, we figure out why the animal is dying, we run all of the laboratory samples. So after Tuskegee, I went on active duty in the United States Army, spent 10 years in the U.S. Army. And during my time in the Army, I was able to do a veterinary anatomic pathology residency. And during that time, we came down here to the National Zoo, and that was the second time I was exposed to the National Zoo, working in the Department of Pathology. After that, 10 years in the Army, I went on what we call in the Indonesian word, merantau. I went on a life journey, and I spent 8 years living in Asia. I went over and worked at a veterinary school in Thailand. And I specifically took that job there because they dealt with wild animals. And in overseas, what we consider wild animals, they really have readily access. They're readily accessible to the veterinarians. So I was able to deal with lions, tigers, bears, elephants all day, every day. Then I went over to Hong Kong and started to help start a veterinary school. I was on a project with Cornell University. I got my hands dirty over there with a lot of aquaculture. Also a lot of laboratory animal science, and still dealing with a lot of wildlife within the region. And I had this time 6-7 years of experience working with wild animals, and this is when the job opened up here at the National Zoo. And when I came here as a veterinary student, I said, this is the place that I wanted to be. This was top notch. It was cutting edge. It had modernized veterinary pathology for wildlife and zoo animals, and they started the home of the zoo medicine. The concept of the skill of a specialty of zoo medicine was started here at the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian, the National Zoo, has a very long history of modernizing and innovating veterinary medicine. So once this position was opened up, I applied, and I left Asia and I came back here.
Well, Kunil, ขอบคุณมากครับ ดีมาก That's awesome.
Good job, cop.
So we're speaking a little Thai there for folks that don't know. So that's awesome. I don't know if you guys are inspired, but I sure am. So Maria Camilla, it sounds like you may have a question. Maria Camilla, are you there? Trying to get you unmuted there, Maria Camilla. If you've got a microphone, let's see if we can get you on here. Maria Camilla, are you there? Oh, I see you twice on here. Let me try this one. Oh, this might work. There you are. Maria Camilla, are you there?
Hello?
Hey, we can hear you just fine. Go ahead with your question.
Hi. So thank you so much for being here and for hosting this. First of all, my question is for Dr. Farnham. I was just wondering, how were you able to do a postdoc after vet school? Did you do a PhD as well? Or because I thought you needed a PhD before you could do a postdoc. So I was just a little curious about that and your journey.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the great question, Maria Camilla. As my great colleague Neil was just saying, that in veterinary medicine, it is one of those great careers where you can specialize. And so I did a postdoctoral residency. So a veterinary degree is a professional doctoral degree, much like a human medical doctor or a dentist or a law degree. And so, yeah, it's a postdoc position. Specializing in veterinary public health, which is an area of public health that's even specialized because it's looking at, in particular, zoonotic diseases that are shared between people and animals, foodborne illness from production animals and in production agriculture, and all sorts of angles where you can get really specialized. So yeah, it's one of these things where you get in a veterinary career path. depending on where your interests lie, you can go the small animal clinician route and stick with that and have a great career. Or you can I did. I was very interested to work overseas, and you can do that.
And,
Awesome.
and where did you do the postdoc?
So most of all my veterinary degrees actually from University of Minnesota. So I did a little bit backwards because I started off with a master's degree because I didn't quite have all the prerequisites out of the way to get into veterinary school. I still needed to get back in the classroom and do some biochemistry and some microbiology with a lab. So I chose at that time because I started working in a laboratory. And because I was at the university, and because I was working at the university, I could get a pretty good tuition rate. I could do like a free course every semester and help pay towards that. And I'm sure Neil will agree that veterinary school is very expensive. So just to keep it on your radar, if you're interested in going along this career path, there are ways to get it paid for. If you, Neil unfortunately missed out on the Army helping pay for his veterinary school, but he got a little boost towards his thing. But there are ways to help pay for it. But you can end up these days upwards of $250,000 in with school debt once you get out of veterinary school. So it's no joke.
No joke. Hey, thanks. So it looks like Rachel Wofford. Rachel, are you there? It sounds like you might have a question. Let's see if we get, there you are. Rachel, can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Speak nice and loud and we'll hear you.
Will do. Thank you guys so much for hosting this. This is wonderful. My question was, for how competitive the field of wildlife and zoo medicine is, what are some ways to set yourself apart in order to gain entry into the field?
That's awesome. Thank you. Veronica, Neil, what do you think?
Veronica?
I'll go first. What I have noticed is getting involved. So in my experience, volunteering is the most valuable thing you can probably do, just because it's most of the time it's being at the right place at the right time and the experience, because a lot of people want experience, but how are you supposed to get that experience if you're not given those opportunities? So even putting yourself out there and volunteering helps.
Neil, what do you think?
I agree with Veronica. Volunteering helps, but also, Kobe Bryant always said you need to be a student of the game. So you really need to take time and understand what the zoo and wildlife field is and what are the major players. You have veterinarians like Mac and myself. You have veterinary technicians like Veronica. You have veterinary scientists who are doing research, like some of our colleagues out in SCBI, Dr. Nooch and Dr. Buddha. Then you have a lot of scientists doing wildlife conservation that involves the animals. So for me, when I looked at it and I wanted to get back into wildlife, I was focusing on wildlife diseases, which is what my specialty is pathology, and also focusing on wildlife diseases at the, we say, food-animal interface. So these are diseases that will go back and forth between our wildlife animals and that could harm our food animals, or that our food animals harbor that can harm the wild animals. As we know, the world is rapidly developing, and we have a lot of these developing nations, or even these first world nations, that are starting to have undeveloped land being encroached on by residential districts or farm districts. So basically, start to study the whole game of the zoo wildlife, understand the different components, and then start to focus, have a goal. Do you want to be involved in conservation of the species? Do you want to be involved in medicine? Do you want to be involved in some type of public health research? And then track from there, start, get on the internet, look at organizations, start to volunteer, as Veronica said. And the last thing I would say is that, remember, even though we're in a pandemic, it's a big world out there. So look for experiences outside of America as well.
Yeah. And Rachel, just, we got a lot of questions, but I love your follow-up. Do you want to ask your follow-up? I think you had, it's a great question.
Sure. My follow-up was for individuals currently in the public health field, individuals with MPHs. How can they become involved and focus more on the wildlife and zoo research and studies?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And there's lots of groups online, State Association of Public Health Veterinarians, things like that you can try to connect through groups. You can try to connect through us at the Smithsonian. And, you know, just to add on to what Veronica and Neil already imparted, you know, a great part of this is just like identifying those opportunities and kind of chasing after them and being persistent. So if you hear about someone going to do, you know, maybe in the state of Virginia, for example, going to do a coyote collaring through their Department of Fish and Game, you know, ask, can I come along as a volunteer? And you do that once, and the next time they might want to hire you on because they've already invested in training you to assist with those sort of things. So just really being you know, persistent, kind of thinking about that the squeaky wheel gets the oil sort of thing, that you kind of make those opportunities happen by following up on what interests you. And how can I tag along? How can I go study coral? You know, I'm visiting in Belize and there's some cool coral reef work going on there. How can I figure out what people are doing? And by talking and communicating and networking, all those things.
Yeah, you know, it's just abundantly clear to me that people who can make other people or other things healthy are in demand right now. So, man, you're talking to some rock stars, folks.
Eric.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just want to just make this one point for Rachel as well. You know, to stay on top of the news and stay on top of the scientific literature, because if you're talking about public health and dealing with wild animals, what we're in right now is a prime example, coronavirus, right? We understand that the origin is from an animal. It is speculated to be from a bat. Before we had this coronavirus, we had MERS. And that was still proposed to be from a bat, being from a camel. So if you keep your pulse on the scientific literature and then what's currently going on in the news, you'll be able to determine what will be a hot topic, whether it's something viral, whether it's something bacterial, parasitic, that is being focused on or being neglected in the public health field, in the veterinary public health field. And that can allow you to determine, you know, where you want to focus your research or focus your volunteering time with.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Celeste Copay, it sounds like you may have a question for our panelists. Celeste, are you there? Let me make sure you're. Yeah, I think you're there. Are you there, Celeste?
Can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead.
Hi. I also want to say thank you for you guys being here and doing this. I'm sure all of us really appreciate it. And so my question is, all three of you have gone to vet school, but I've heard from my peers and my professors at school that vet school is even more stressful and competitive than med school. So I was wondering, how did you guys handle it? Like, is there any truth to that?
Yeah, whoever wants, I know you all have such different perspectives. Veronica, if you want, maybe I know, you know, maybe talk about the track you started with, and then we'll move to these other guys. It sounds like in terms of the barriers for your, at least in terms of school, that I'm sure it was really hard, but can you talk to us about that? Veronica, you may be frozen. There she is. We can see you now.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, well, my path I feel like was probably way smoother than vet school. My career was just a 2-year, basically a training. Sorry, guys, I have to mute.
Oh, you're fine. Don't worry. We're in the age of COVID. Kids are allowed. Don't worry. You're okay.
I'll cover the answer, Eric. So, Celeste, there is some truth to that statement that veterinary school is harder than medical school because we study about 6 or 7 basic animal species. So while a human doctor can go to sleep after they've been studied the respiratory system of humans, you can't go to sleep once you finish studying the respiratory system of dogs because you have to know the respiratory system of cat, sheep, chicken, cows, and horses. So the main thing is if you want to get to vet school and you want to stay in vet school and graduate vet school, you got to have that as your goal. You have to not apply to vet school saying, hey, this is something I'll do anyway. You have to really want it because there's going to be some very, very long nights, very, very tough weekends. Because not only do you have the academic component, you got to have the application component. Most vet schools now, your last 2 years are clinical, then you have to do some off-site externships. So the main thing is really you have to focus on understand time management. And for me, I don't know how it was for Mac or Veronica. I can't memorize anything. I had to learn to understand. So learning to understand was a different type of studying than what I was doing in undergrad. So when I left undergrad and got into veterinary school, I had to change my whole studying habits. But a lot of things are stressful. You just also have to have a vice that will balance your stress. For me, in a veterinary school, my vice was comic books and video games.
There could be worse vices out there, Neil. Not bad. Veronica, please don't worry. I've got like 5 little kids running around here. It's a miracle they haven't broken it already. But you were starting to say about your path. If you would, go ahead. If your little ones will
well,
let you.
Yeah. Well, for me, that's the reason I chose the path that I did. Like I wanted to work with animals. I wanted to work with animals in the medical field, but I did not want to do all the studying that was involved with it. And just seeing the role of the veterinarian, it wasn't what I wanted to do. My goal was to do more of the hands-on part of it, as opposed to the diagnosing and the treating, the part of the veterinarian. So that's why I chose my path. And my path was just a 2-year program where I did the 2-year program. And then once I was done, I had my license to be a licensed veterinary technician, and I had my associate's degree. And as I mentioned before, there are other programs throughout the country that are 4-year programs where you actually get a bachelor's in addition. And those, I think, are more for people who aren't sure if they want to be a veterinarian or not, so that way they already have their bachelor's, and then they can continue on to pursue the veterinary route if that's what they want to do. I feel, I don't know. But for me, that's why I kind of chose a speed pass, because I wanted to be in the veterinary field, but all that studying and stress just wasn't my style.
You know, Veronica, what I love about your story is, well, 2 things. One, I've always said the world will always need nurses, always, right? We can never have enough, you know, and you know, you're sort of such a great illustration of pursuing something that the world needs, right? I mean, they need. And Neil, by the way, I have to just say, I'll never forget that you made me think of that scene in Seinfeld with Kramer, who was like, you know, I bet you got to kill a chicken, you know, he goes through all the animals. He goes to see a vet. So I agree with you. But Mac, it sounds like, you know, you've been through the ringer in terms of your experiences. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, so a couple of things just to top up both what Neil and Veronica said. So in the U.S. currently, there are 30 veterinary medical schools and colleges, which makes it really competitive from the get-go. By comparison, there's over 150, about 160 medical schools in the United States. So even just getting a foot in the door, getting into veterinary school is super competitive. You know, and when I was on faculty at University of Minnesota, we had well over 4,000 applicants a year for 100 spots. So that gets really competitive. And, you know, they have great ways that they're going through trying to get well-rounded candidates. Some people with applied practical experience that comes from volunteering, following other passions. It's not just the everybody with a 4.0, 4.1 GPA that gets into vet schools these days. So it's really competitive from the get-go. And just to share with you, so when I did my master's program, I think throughout an entire 2-year master's degree program, I had about 35 course credits. When I got to veterinary school, the very first semester in a single semester was 23 credit hours. So just by comparison, that's a lot of work that they jam into your brain in just the first semester. And it is really tough. You really got to get yourself organized. You got to not do what I did and watch football on Sunday afternoons because you love football, because that's when you study for your Monday morning exams, because they're always on Monday mornings. And it's really a full-time job. I mean, there are a few outliers that manage to work and get paid while they're going through veterinary school, but in my class of 90-some students, I think there's only 1 or 2 folks that could manage a paying gig while they were going through vet school.
Yeah. Well, guys, believe it or not, we're actually out of time. And so for those of you, we had a lot of questions we didn't get to, but for everybody who tuned in today and stuck with it, so many people have, you know, I just really want to honor you for doing so. And for Mac and Veronica and Neil, guys, you are rock stars. We've done a bunch of these, but man, I don't know if any group has been more impressive than you. And so I just want to honor you for all you're doing, and especially going back to what I was saying about the world needs health right now. We sure do. So thank you for everything you do. And again, if you were smart enough to tune in today to the Smithsonian Here to Career webinar with these awesome wildlife veterinarians, we're so glad you did. On behalf of the Smithsonian Institution, my name is Eric Woodard, Director of Fellowships and Internships. Thank you so much for watching. We'll have this up as a replay on our blog, so you can watch it again if you want. In the meantime, stay tuned for other upcoming career webinars, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again, panelists. Thanks again, audience. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.